So I'm talking about Sony cameras today. Yeah, no. I mostly talk about Sony cameras. There's a very good reason why I talk about Sony cameras. Why is that? Anybody guess? They thought that was interesting. No, it's a pretty obvious one.
The future.
More obvious than that. Why am I talking about Sony cameras? There we go, there we go. So I'm going to ask really obvious questions throughout this. And normally people get stumped when I ask obvious questions because they think, well, you can't be asking that because that's too obvious, but I will. So we're talking for an hour and a half. Well, I'm talking for an hour and a half, but there's no formal Q&A. It can be if you want to, but I've got a lot of content. So just ask questions throughout, really. It's a nice small room. Don't need a microphone to be passed around. So if there's anything I'm talking about that you want to know more about, or as long as it's connected, don't ask, is this better than the GH5? Because I'm not here to talk about GH5, which is the most common question I get on like Facebook or Instagram lives. A7S2 or GH5? And I always reply the very obvious answer, which is? I say both. Isn't that easier? Why not just get both? It's only money. This is the problem with this place here. I've been to a lot of shows. I just come back from the NAB show in Vegas, which is massive. Everybody's ever been to it before. But you can't buy anything there, so it's quite safe. You can have a look around and just drool at everything. Here you drool at everything, and then you go and buy it. So I'm just trying to keep away. I'm going to hide in here for the rest of the show, because there's a few things I want to get. But I say ask questions throughout my career. Just going to go through this. 17 years at full-time at Sky. Best place to learn how to shoot and tell stories. And I left 11 years ago to go freelance. So I've been in this a fair old time. Anybody here work in news or has worked in news? Who here are professional filmmakers, video people? I hate the word videographers, but I don't know why. We call them photographers, and that's fine, but videographers, I think it's the video word. It's such an ugly word. I just get images of VHS cameras on your shoulder going back. Who here is a photographer? Professional? Cool. Any of you interested in video? Good, because it's going to be talking about video. You're in the wrong talk. So the type of work that I do. Basically, I do documentaries. Broadcast independence is my #1 thing. That takes up most of my time, which is great. Because I come from that news background, I find it much more interesting telling real stories that interest me than doing fiction. I love fiction. I love watching fiction. Fiction requires a lot of patience and a lot of time generally. So documentaries, you can shoot generally a sort of a half-hour documentary. For broadcast TV, you shoot in 5 days. An hour-long one, you'll shoot in about 7 to 8, depending on the project. Whereas a film, you'll be doing it for weeks and weeks and weeks, which is really cool to get your teeth into. But it's, being away from home and all that sort of stuff. And it's fun. I do short films every now and then because it keeps you fresh, and you can bring a documentary eye and speed into that narrative work, which can also be quite frustrating if you work with people who aren't used to that. So you're raring to go, and they're faffing and they're fiddling and stuff like that. But so I like to do it all, really. Corporates pay the bills, generally, because documentaries don't pay very well. And I like corporates as well. They can be I like a challenge, and corporates are challenging because they tend to be quite boring. So boring stuff is a great challenge. If you just do really cool, interesting stuff all the time, so it won't be that interesting to you anymore. You'll be like, oh, yes, another really cool story, but in this amazing place. Whereas you go and do 8 interviews in a boardroom and make them all look different, it actually makes you appreciate the other stuff. So, but that's, for me, it's a test of when I hire shooters to work with me. I don't ask to see their really fancy stuff. I ask to see their bog standard corporate work, because that's where I can tell your skills. So commercials I do occasionally, but not that much. Basically anything I'm interested in. It took a while, because when I left Sky, I didn't want to do news anymore, so I had to start again from the beginning. So it took about 4 years freelancing before I started getting the stuff I wanted to shoot. So I am a camera agnostic. I use everything. Just looking around, I was looking at basically every stand, every lens stand there. I could basically, the only camera I don't own I could see was an Olympus. I own a camera from everywhere else. But this is what I shoot with professionally. These are all Sony cameras. You're probably too small for you to work out what's what, but that's an F55, which actually I've sold now. FS5, A7S. Can't tell if it's 1 or 2. I think that's a 2. FS7, FS7, A6300. So, why do I use Sony cameras? Who uses Sony here, by the way? Okay. Why do you use Sony cameras?
Because I jumped from DSLR, Canon, and they shoot 4K, and I was interested in the log side of it.
Okay.
Small form factor.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, anybody else? Why do you use Sony? Using them for years? You went through all the hard years. Did you go through the Alpha Minolta years? Betacam, proper years. How's your back? Yeah, no, I'm the same. Yeah, we're getting our wheelchairs later. Yeah, I come from the Betacam school. My first professional video camera was a Betacam, which weighed a ton, about the same as Blackmagic Ursa, maybe a bit less. So it's funny how fed up with all of those cameras. I mean, it's actually the same way as an Alexa, to be honest with you. But I moved away because I wanted smaller cameras. Mind you, I ended up with an F55 for a while. When that's rigged out, it's pretty heavy. But the reason I use Sony, simply the best tools for the job. So as long as I keep making the cameras which are the best for me, I carry on using Sony. You know, every time another company brings out a video camera, I look at it, I maybe try it out, and so far I always go back to my Sonys. I look at the Canon, you know, I had a C300, and it was my main video camera for about 18 months to 2 years, and then Sony brought out the F55, and I switched because it had 4K, high frame rates, all those cool things that absolutely did not need whatsoever for my broadcast work, but cool features to have. So that's why, and the FS7, the reason why I sold the F55 was because the FS7 came out, and for my work it makes sense to have a smaller, lighter camera that if it does get trashed in these really exotic, crazy places, it's not a £25,000 camera to replace. And it does great images. So one of the words which is on the title of this is the word cinematic, and we'll be touching on this throughout. And I always, whenever I do anything to do with cinematic, I always ask people to tell me, what does it mean to you? Not just to me, to you. What would you define cinematic as? I'm going to point at people because you're all quiet.
Me?
Yeah, cinematic.
Cinematic. Lighting, G3 lit.
Nice word. Perfect. Good. Lighting.
Shots, yeah.
Good lighting. Yeah.
Production.
Yes. Nice lighting.
Nice grading.
Yeah. Don't do one at a time, you know. Leave nothing for anybody else. Anybody else? Anybody else? You.
Shallow depth of field.
We all like to shoot wide open. Well, don't always, but yes, absolutely. Yeah. Shallow depth of field. I think we need to rephrase that. And this is something that's key about the large sensor cameras and using DSLRs and stuff, is selectable depth of field, which is something was very difficult to achieve with smaller sensors. So that you don't always want shallow depth of field. As much as I've shot every single photograph today outside in the hall at 1.2, that's just because I've got a new lens that shoots 1.2. But as soon as you start shooting, you know, video, then you don't want that. Sometimes you need to see, you know, what's behind. So it's not always like super shallow. Anything else? Suspension, that's a hell of a word. Suspension disbelief. Yeah, I guess so. Can be. For documentaries, my documentaries are cinematic, but I don't really hope for it. And sometimes you might want a suspension disbelief in the documentary. Other times you want it to be, just feel very shockingly real. I don't know. Anything else? There's a really couple of really important ones.
Framing?
Yeah, composition. Framing is very important. Framing is important as lighting. So your composition is really key. And for me, I do initially start, you know, my hobby as a kid was photography, and I only moved into video accidentally. Basically, because when I first started, I wanted to become a press photographer, and this is back in '88, and I was told, you should get into video because digital's coming in, it's going to change the industry, and it's going to be rubbish. So that's what happened to video, mind you, but it took a long time for that to happen. So my framing is very photographic, but whereas a lot of movement is in the frame, but I love to move the camera too. So movement is also can be cinematic, as long as it's not gratuitous, if it's driven by what's going on in the screen, whether it's motivated by a person or things. We all do non-motivated shots. You know, if we're using a drone, most of them aren't motivated. But if you're using things like Steadicams or stabilizers or sliders or dollies, tend to need motivation. Otherwise, it's gratuitous. So, cinematic, you know, all of these, I'd definitely say lighting and composition are some of the most important things. We are, of course, a lens show, so lenses are also everything. And I think I had a question on one of the social medias, I don't know which one it was. Lenses don't matter. Somebody actually said that. And I'm like, no, they do. They really do matter. You don't have to spend a fortune on lenses. And this is on here is an SLR Magic 35 1.2 Cinema Prime type. They call it Cinema Prime, but it is and it isn't. It's £450. You know, it's really high quality. You don't have to spend a fortune for lenses, but you know, high quality optics are essential. So before I get onto the cameras and some more content, I just want to talk about lenses. So what are the Sony users here? How many of you use native lenses, E mounts, FE mounts? So what would you say the advantages are of FE? Yes, sorry, I'm pointing at you because we were earlier. Yes, but that camera doesn't have autofocus that's usable. So this is the 70-200 f4. The Sony lenses, they're slowly coming through, the faster ones. The zooms are coming through, the 2.8s and stuff. There are some fast primes, but you got it right. I mean, it's one of the key things about native lenses is the actual autofocus, if your camera works with them. The other thing is size. Tends to be smaller because they're designed for that small flange. So, and the connection's nice and solid. What's the biggest downsides with the native lenses? And I bought loads. Initially, my advice with lenses has always been buy lenses which can work across your cameras in case you need to change. So like when I was coming in here, there was a guy who's saying, he was at the GH5 talk and he was saying to Wex, I want to trade in my Canon lenses because I'm buying GH5. And I was listening to that and going, don't do that. I'm not saying don't buy a GH5, I'm saying don't sell your Canon lenses because you're getting a GH5. Just get a speed booster and use that, because if you start buying Micro Four Thirds lenses, you're boxing yourself into only using Micro Four Thirds forever until you sell them, because that's all they'll ever work on. Whereas lenses which are designed for Nikons are the most flexible lenses out there, because they have a larger flange distance between the lens and the sensor, which means they can go on pretty much everything with an adapter. So, I mean, Canon lenses are great, but going back to the native lenses, the biggest issue for me with native lenses, not all of them, but most of them, is the fly-by-wire manual focus. Has anybody had fun experience with this?
Quite good on the batteries.
It's better. It's better. So the way that it works, so normally when you focus, this is a mechanical focus. So this has something called hard stops, which is rather nice. So when you're getting your focus, finding your point and focus, you go to your, this is a Nikon focus way around, so it's a bit confusing. But I still have to take this off, even though there's no camera on. I just feel wrong pointing a lens at somebody with a lens cap on, even though I'm missing the key bit. So when you're doing a rack focus, you find your end point or your start point, then you find your other point. So the great thing about mechanical focus is you have this muscle memory, and so you know where it is. Now, even with the Canon lenses, it's almost all of them. They're all mechanical, and so you can do the same thing. You just got to be careful not to go past the point, the minimum focus point, or infinity, because it just keeps turning and you lose that point. With the Sony fly-by-wires, what happens is you find your point, the start point, and you find your end point. You do it quite quickly as you're doing it really fast, and then as soon as you start the move slowly, it's like, whoa, why is it not going anywhere? It basically changes speed to match your speed. So instead of your focus being like that from your 2 points, it's like that. So if you're trying to, you basically have to focus by eye rather than focus by hand, and it's very difficult. There are some native lenses which have proper manual focus. The only autofocus one I know of, and Tam can correct me if I'm wrong, is the 90mm macro. I think it's the only native FE mount which has autofocus and proper hard stops, and so that's the biggest issue with native lenses. But the more cameras come out with autofocus, then it makes more sense. So I use the A7R II as my walk around camera, although I'm using a manual lens, and I have found it a bit of a pain today when I'm walking around. I had a coffee in my hand and you can't focus because it's you're like trying to get the cup and trying to do this, whereas normally autofocus I just go hey, 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 for stills or video, whereas manual you can't do that. You have to set a focus and then just that will do close enough, especially at 1.2 you have to keep moving. So more cameras come out with autofocus. Talk about autofocus a bit more, but that's my main issue with native lenses, but they are really, really nice as well. Most of the lenses I use for my professional work are Canon mounts still, especially when it comes to the FS7 and FS5. Can anybody guess why that is, apart from the focus? There's a clue in a way that we put on the EF onto E. What do I use? Or, yeah, basically it's this. The Metabones normal and speed booster. The reason I use this, I love using Canon lenses. This is a speed booster on here right now. Super 35mm camera, so equivalent to an APS-C. So it's great for that. That's the standard size for professional video, Super 35. I love full frame though. I fell in love with full frame with the 5D Mark II, like everybody else did. And mind you, since Canon have since kind of dropped the ball with their 1.74 times crop on that. Sony brought out their A7 series with full frame video, 4K, and I love that look. I love those characteristics and that depth of field. And the great thing about using a speed booster on an FS5, FS7, and even an A6500 actually, cameras like that, is it focuses the light from the lens through this glass, so you don't lose anything. It gives you the depth of field characteristics of full frame and an extra stop of light. So when I'm shooting, with this 7200, I can make it act as 7200 field of view on the full frame, or I can have a 1.5 times crop, which gives me a longer lens. So I tend to switch around. If I'm shooting wildlife, for example, then I'll want that extra. I want the standard one without a speed boost. I want to have that extra length on the lens. That's huge flexibility, which you cannot do with native lenses. It's always going to be Super 35. So that's one thing to consider. And of course, Canon lenses do work on Canon cameras. Sony's don't, strangely. Nobody's brought out a Sony adapter to go on Canon lenses, although I did have a guy asking me yesterday about a Micro Four Thirds Voigtlander, an adapter for E-mount, and I said no, can't do it unless you want a big old vignette. You can check this out down at the Fuji stand. This is the 50-135 Cine lens, which is coming out in June, and this is the 18-55. This is Super 35 only. Mr. Betacam, what's your name?
Steve.
Steve, do you miss your B4 lenses?
Yes, and I want to take this lens out.
I miss my B4 lenses. B4 lenses are the nice big zooms, which just worked perfectly. The focus was there, the manual iris zoom, it's all there, and the range is there. This doesn't have the range. Having a 20 times zoom at the touch of, it was just really lovely to have that. And when we moved to SLR lenses, we gave up those beautiful mechanics of these proper lenses. And there are cinema lenses out there. They've been out there for quite a while. Biggest issue with cinema lenses, standard cinema lenses, is price and weight. I've rented them, and they're great. And I'd love to have an everyday cinema lens. It's just stupid money, I tried the Fuji Cabrio. I think it's 20-135. I think it's 25,000 euros, which is a lot. But what they've done is they've taken the same optics and put it into a hard plastic body and split the range into two. So you have these two lenses, and the optics are the same. It's a T2.9, which is transmission stop, which equates to f2.8. All the full mechanics you're used to. Manual iris, a parfocal zoom, which SLR lenses don't have. Parfocal means when you change your focal length, the focus isn't lost. So we're used to, with B4 lenses, you crash in, you get your focus, you crash out, and you've got it. None of this digital zoom in. This is proper parfocal. This is proper constant aperture, which means when you zoom in, it doesn't lose any light. Whereas a lot of these constant apertures aren't constant apertures. They say they are, but you just film a white wall, you zoom in, and it's definitely darker. A little bit. You can fix that in post, but I'd rather a lens was proper constant aperture, and this one is. I think it's like $3,500 here, but it's beautiful. So this is my 2 documentary lenses. Well, this one I'm getting next week, and so I'll have my documentary lens kit, and I'll combine that with a fast prime for low light shooting. And if you need any other specialist lenses like a longer lens or wide angle, you can always bring them with. But to have affordable cine glass, you may think $3,500 is a lot, but it's not that much really when it comes to high quality lens.
Is there a way of getting a servo zoom?
It's one thing they've not put on there to cut down on costs is no servo. I mean, I never used servo anyway, to be honest with you. I only liked it as the grip. But on my FS5 and FS7, I have that handle grip, so I'm not lost on it. The only way you could get a servo is a remote zoom motor. And there's lots out there. I saw one from Tilter, which did focus, zoom, iris. Proper big remote, and it's like $1,300, which is nuts. So there are those out there if you need that servo. And I'm sure somebody will make one that just fits on the side, because there's similar ones out there for SLR lenses. But yeah, if you need that, then sure. Down on the other end of the price scale, I talked about this. You can check them out on the Holden stand. I really like these. They're nice and cheap. They are mechanical only, which is good. Just for focus, you need to be a bit more fiddly. And I had to, like earlier, I couldn't get focus. I had to put the peaking on. And there we go. It's in focus, sort of. Autofocus. I love the Batis lenses. They're probably my favourite lenses for the A7 series because of the autofocus and the optics. And they're lovely. They look nice too. There's no manual iris. It's all through with the camera. But the autofocus on these is astoundingly good. And autofocus is the future. Not necessarily, not everything, but the ability to autofocus is really cool. I shot a documentary in Saudi Arabia in February. And I shot at the interview at 85 1.4 actually. And actually it was on a Sigma Art on a Canon camera. But the autofocus was locked on, was perfect. And when Sony bring out touchscreen tracking on their next line, although the A9 has it, but the A9 doesn't have profiles yet. We're going to get that petition going to get it spoken about in the House of Commons, demand that they debate it. So let me just show you, this is the autofocus working on the A7R2 at 1.8. This is on a slider moving, and it keeps focus the whole time. And when you're pushing in, it keeps focus the whole time. Although you cannot define the point on the A7R2, you can either set it center or you can set it to wide, and it picks the most obvious thing, and it keeps it in. It did not lose it on this. I tested it and tested it and tested it. Yeah.
If an interview would be moving their head back,
Keep it in.
does it keep it in?
Mm.
They use face detection.
So face detection works in HD. In 4K, it doesn't come up with the square, but it still works. But it's just, face detection is great until somebody turns to the side and you lose that face. But this keeps it in. It keeps it in all the way. And I did a test. I don't have it here of my assistant Julian rocking backwards and forwards at high speed on the A6300 on a Zeiss 2418, I think it was, and it kept him in. He was going mental. He was like a crazy man. And it kept him in focus. The focus speed is way faster than the Canon's autofocus. It is astoundingly fast. So, and this is the A7S II. It's not as good. It's slow. It's contrast based only. It does work, but any fast movement, it does play catch up. Where contrast works, it goes past the focus point and realizes, that was in focus, and moves back to where it was. So it is a bit slow, you can see. But as long as somebody isn't being crazy, if somebody's being crazy, the thing you need to do is to ask them to stop being crazy. That's my best advice. Rather than look at going autofocus, just say, can you please stop rocking backwards and forwards? This is the A7S II in HD, see how long it takes to pick me up. See, it does work, and I've used it a lot on gimbals, and it does work. I don't trust it. I trust the A7R II much more in autofocus. And so the problem we have with the video cameras, this is the FS5, so they need to fix, it's still all contrast based, and they need to get the autofocus. I'm sure they will in the next generation. This is me trying to get it to pick me up. Come on. I'm there, the big thing in the middle. You can't miss me. Come on, you can do this. So this is why I don't mind not having, I don't mind not using native lenses, because the autofocus doesn't really work that well. It does work better in HD, just in 4K. And this is what you find a bit of a quirk with the Sony cameras. I guess they're pushing them a lot on certainly on the A7 cameras, and certain features don't work as well when you go into 4K as in HD. But it does work, it's just a bit slow, not something I wouldn't set up as a B camera and just leave it, which is what my FS5 generally is a B camera. I need it, and it just lost me there. So the best for video autofocus is the A6500 and the A9 touchscreen tracking. Very good, very accurate. And then the A7R II and A6300, which doesn't have touch screen, but it still does it really, really well. So I love autofocus, and especially on gimbals and things like that, I find it really essential because you can't touch the lens. You have to, unless you're going to shoot at f11 and a wide angle lens, which you don't really want. There's no point, otherwise you may as well just get something else. I have lots of gimbals. Movi M5 is my main gimbal when my back's not so bad, and when my back's bad I then get out a little Came TV one. And I picked up the new Came TV Patriot, something like that, I don't know, they're funny names. Profit, I knew it was Profit, and it's really nice. It can mount either side, the motor can mount either side. And also they brought out a ring type stand, just like Movi Pro, and you can put it down. So yeah, there's lots of gimbals out there. If you want a cheap single arm one, the Zion crane is pretty good. The only downside to the Zion crane is the motor's on the right hand side, which covers up the battery compartment to the Sonys. We all know Sony batteries last 6 minutes, and so you have that issue. You have to take it off or plug in a USB to it to keep it going. So let's go through any questions, just shout out. These are the main cameras that I use. The FS7 is my main camera. Anybody here use an FS7 or have used or own an FS7? Who owns an FS7? Nobody? Wow, you're not doing your job. FS7 too? FS5? Don't be embarrassed, it's a good camera. It's lovely and cute. It's an FS7 in the wash that's gone, you know.
It's very portable.
It's very portable. So what is so good about the FS7 for people who've used it? And this goes on to something I was talking about to some people at the GH5 talk at the end of it. I hate external recorders. Hate them. If I have to, I will use them. Hence the FS5, I use it because of the raw out gives you a much better image. But on the FS7 it has 4K 10-bit internal recording, up to 60 frames per second. This is so essential. This is such a big thing to have this internally. I never want to have a bloody big monitor type thing with a cable as my recording. It's nice to have that, but as soon as you go handheld, it's a nightmare. And battery consumption. For me, it's about internal recording. And I love my slow-mo. So to have it as 4K and 10-bit. Anybody understand 8-bit, 10-bit? You all understand it? Amazing. Okay. That's good. Who doesn't? Cool. 10 bits better. There you go. 12 bits even better. It's about the shades of the color, of the brightness. And in 8-bit, 256 levels. In 10 bits, it's 4 times as many as that. And then in 12-bit. So what happens is, when you have those solid colors, like on skies, it tends to band in 8-bit, especially if you try and grade it from S-Log, especially. 10-bit, it can still band, but you have to be pushing it a lot to let it do that. So it's a huge benefit. It's all about grading. It's about getting, you are able to grade it a lot more than you can in 8-bit. So to make sure 8-bit doesn't fall apart, you need to really nail your exposure. If you're gonna, especially if you're gonna shoot in log, which I'll talk about in a minute. It does high frame rate, up to 180 frames per second continuous. Has a 14-stop dynamic range with S-Log. And we all like dynamic range. Dynamic range, yeah, but if you don't understand dynamic range, don't be embarrassed at all, because you're here, you've paid to be here. If you haven't paid to be here, you can leave £20 at the front at the end. I just want to get another lens I saw. You understand dynamic range? That's good. Don't be embarrassed to ask. It performs well in available light. It's, I shoot 6400 fine. But after that, I'll probably switch to an A7S2 if I want to go higher. An A7S2 you can shoot at 25,600 just fine with it. If you push it another stop, then it starts getting a bit noisy. It's all about your exposure as well. So it is good in available light, which is key for documentary filmmaking. Look at the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro. God, how many more words can they put on it? But it's a nice camera, but I shot with it, and it only really went to 800. I went to 1600, and I had fixed pattern noise, and went, that's out, no good for me. So I keep trying these other cameras, go there, this looks really cool, nice features, and then it's all about trying the camera. Specs mean nothing until you try it. And not being able to shoot at 1600, for me, is just crazy. We're in 2017, I should be able to shoot over 800 ISO. Even Reds do higher than that now, and that says something. It's an excellent documentary camera, but also works across everything. You can use this camera just fine for cinema work, although it doesn't have the Cine outer badge, because it didn't shoot 24p when it first came out. It still can be used for cinema. So it's a terrific all-rounder, and it's pretty, as video cameras go, pretty affordable. I'm going to play a tiny clip, I think, but I don't really want to play it all. So I'm mixing 180 frames. There is some audio on this. Where is it? This is from a documentary series called Wonderlist for the Americans that I shot. This is actually when the camera first came out, back in November 2014. It's been out a while. And it's great, the image was just terrific. The slow motion's great, dynamic range was great. Mixing the HD super slow motion with the 4K looked just fine, and I do that quite a lot. You can, as long as most of your footage is 4K, you can upscale your HD just, if you put a little bit of sharpening in it, as long as you've got your focus right, you can get away with it. And also don't forget, by the time it goes out and you watch it at home, nobody's actually that close to screen to tell any difference anyway. A screen this size to see 4K to make a difference, you'd need to be, probably you're about as far away as you could be, actually probably here. Anybody further away than here, you can't tell the difference between 4K and HD on a screen. So when you go around to John Lewis and look at the TVs and you go, wow, look at the resolution, it's amazing. Whoa, look at that. And you go home and it arrives, you put it on the wall and you sit down and you go, I think it looks better. Let me just check. Oh yeah, that's amazing, so much better. That's the problem with 4K. So you can upscale just fine. I've been shooting 4K for 5 years. How many of my productions have been finished in 4K? Professional productions? None. It's ridiculous. By the time I switched to 4K from HD, I'd only started really getting everything in HD. Prior to that, I was shooting SD, or shooting HD for SD broadcast, because I always want to shoot the better quality. So it's a massive pain. God, I go to my parents and they've got a 4K TV. What do they watch on the SD Sky? It's like, for God's sake, Dad's watching football and it's like Lego, the blockiness. It's terrible. I was like, just go down the menu, see the HD bit, click on that. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's better, I think. Doesn't matter. No, 4K. I still shoot 4K, so I'll talk about this a bit later on, but I always want to shoot with the best quality image. There's a number of reasons why you want to shoot 4K, but I'll get onto that. But it's a 4K camera. It works best at 4K. It works great in HD, and it gives you a higher frame rate, but the 4K the internal recording isn't too big. It's manageable size-wise, so I really like it. I think it's about 2.5 times more than the HD, depending on what you record in.
What do you generally use to edit and grade?
Well, if it's a documentary series, and they do it. If it's my own projects, I use Premiere, and I grade within Premiere. I use the Lumetri panel, and I use Film Converts. I don't use Resolve.
Do you need like really powerful PC?
PC?
Oh my god.
I would say really powerful Mac, but they don't exist. I have a Mac. I have a trash can Mac Pro, and it's all right. They haven't upgraded it in 3.5 years, however long I've had it. But my MacBook Pros are all right. But no, it's the XAVCI is fine. On an iMac 5K, you could do it fine. As long as your laptop has a graphics card, don't get the Intel Iris one, which is integrated in the motherboard. Forget that. But yeah, you don't need a massive. In a PC, you're laughing. You can get equivalent of what the Mac does at a quarter of the price. It just looks ugly. So.
How do you manage all your 4K media?
Hard drives, lots of them. You mean the actual what I record on?
So yeah, well, your archive.
Oh, the archive. Yeah, the archive is a bit of a mess. I have all the master edits on a server and on the cloud. And what I don't have is I should get select rushes and do that as well. But you kind of always got projects going. And so as soon as you finished one, I really should sit down and then just clip up stuff. But I'm always, on to the next one. So I don't really have much of a chance. So I do have, I'm like a hoarder when it comes to hard drives. And they're not very reliable because if you don't start them up every now, repeatedly, they will fail. Although I have gone back to a lot of them recently for stock purposes, and they all seem to be fine. But this is the problem with digital media, away from tapes. You shot tape or optical disc, you stuck it on the shelf, that was it. And generally it's fine. But sadly, we don't have that, so I don't have a great solution yet for long-term storage. LTO tapes, and people swear by that, but I haven't really used it. The A7S II is my main A7 series camera for video. Whilst I have the A7R II and it's my favourite all-rounder, that's the key because it does really good stills, this is better for video. Internal 4K full frame. 5-axis stabilised sensor. There's loads more features in this than you get in an FS camera, FS5 or FS7, as in not all of them. You don't have the 10-bit recording, you don't have a variable ND like the FS7 II and FS5 do. But this 5-axis stabilised sensor, if you've never used one of these, they're fantastic. I mean, suddenly you don't have to have IS lenses, or OIS lenses as Sony call them. Suddenly you can use your primes, your fast primes, your third-party old Nikons or whatever it is, because they're all stabilised. And it's great for handheld shooting. It's great for tripod shooting. Because I've done some lots of safari type stuff using a really long lens on an FS7, and it shakes with the wind. But you do it on a 5-axis stabilised sensor on the A7S II or A7R, and it's fantastic. I'll show you an example of that in a minute, but I love this so much. The HD 120 frames per second is cropped. It's a 1-to-1 sampling of the 4K sensor, so it's like a 2x crop, but the quality is very good. Full frame, HD image, the HD looks great. This is the key thing, the high ISO performance, none of this 800 ISO stuff. In fact, the minimum ISO in the A7S II in S-Log is 1600. You may think that's really high, and it is relatively high, but I'll talk about S-Log a bit in a minute and what that actually means, but it's not that bad. If you're using NDs, you can get past it just fine. So, it's small. I love small cameras. I had a guy come over to do some private tuition from America, and he had an FS7 and an A7S II, both of them kitted out. He just started, kitted out with the most stuff I've ever seen. His A7S II pretty much filled up this table. Well, not as long, not as wide as that, but it was like, whoa. Picked it up and went, whoa, I'm not carrying that. That's ridiculous. I'm going to take that apart. There's no point having a small camera if you're going to turn it into an FS7. Keep it small. The EVF is terrific. So this is the key thing for me. When I shoot documentaries, sometimes when I was in, where was I? In Mumbai. Has never been so hassled in my life when trying to shoot, apart from Marrakesh, that was worse. But in Mumbai, everybody was crowding around. Everybody was crowding around, but it was the police who kept on stopping me, asking for my permit. And whilst I did have a permit, which was in my wallet, if you know what I mean, I didn't want to keep giving them a permit because it was just driving me nuts, and they won't give me a receipt for it. So can I have a receipt for that permit? So I ended up just putting it away and getting the A7S out and filming handheld, and I got great stuff. And they never once stopped me. So sometimes you just want to go small. What we got here? So I'm going to show you, so I can't show you this because it's not been released yet. So I shot a science fiction film on the A7S II handheld Now, I'm not a fan of shooting everything handheld, and a lot of people shoot it because they can't be bothered with a tripod. Tripods are the best piece of kit in the world. They're fantastic. But I wanted a very fluid and natural motion to this. And with the 5-ax stabilized sensor, I got some fantastic results with non-stabilized lenses, Sigma Arts. And it was terrific. I shot them pretty fast. I was shooting f1.8 to 1.4, depending on the shot, so you can see from this. But I was using a Zacuto Gratical Eye EVF, which, whilst the EVF is good on the camera, for critical focus, I really needed a proper external one. And I got some terrific results. It's only on a tripod just to set up the shot. I wasn't actually using it for that. But that 5-ax stabilized sensor is an absolute joy. I shot this last year. Mo Farah documentary. Here he is holding my A7S II on a Letters Helix stabilizer. These are the cameras we used, 2 FS7s and an A7S Mark II for the gimbal. I only used it for the gimbal. I'm not going to put an FS7 on a gimbal. Whilst you can buy them, forget that. That's really going to kill your back. If anything's going to kill your back, it's bad enough a gimbal with a small camera, but you put a big one on, forget it. Sorry.
The meters excellent for DSLRs.
It's great. It's the most natural gimbal I've ever used. You can also put it down, which is lovely, but it just is an extension. It just sits right here, and it's really tight to you, and it really moves naturally with you. Whereas these other ones, it's the most unique gimbal I've used, and it really does give you Helix, Letters Helix Junior. It's great. It really is great, and I love that compact size. Relative compact size, but once you tried it, initially you're trying to go, it's a bit strange. Once you shot with it, you're like, wow, it's so different to the other ones. Yes.
Do you have to balance that like you do with a?
Oh, everything needs balancing. Yeah, it's pretty easy to balance though.
I thought you said that you used a Mobi 5 as your main.
It is my main one still, but I do like this as well. I tend to take both of me on gigs in case one fails. Not that I tend to, but if I go really far away in the world, I need to make sure I've got a spare. But I switch between them, to be honest with you. Sometimes I like this. This is great for cars and vehicles because it doesn't take up much space. You get some terrific stuff. And I like the bigger ones when I want to mount monitors and other stuff. And you can go a lot higher with a Movi when you've got it on a ring because you can hold it up like this. And you can't do that with the Helix. You can only really hold it, here. But with the Movi, you can hold it by the bottom of the ring, and it's really high. So depending on what I shoot.
And you put a ring on the M5?
Yeah, the ring is essential. Hence the new one, the Movi Pro, just comes with a ring because it's so much better. And DJI have miraculously came up with the same design.
Yeah.
I don't know how they managed that, but it's a ring with feet. Yeah. What a coincidence.
Did you actually shoot Mo running?
Yeah, I'll show you. So this is 120 frames per second on 100 frames per second on the A7S II. On the Letters gimbal from a tuk-tuk going alongside of him. And it's great. Some terrific stuff. And I think this is about 70 millimeters I was filming at to get nice and tight, which is quite tight for a gimbal. Normally you shoot wide, but I've got some great results, and the quality is terrific, really terrific.
So was that a zoom lens?
It's a 1635 zoom, and I had it using clear image zoom, which I'll talk about in a minute. Who's talking there? Sorry. Yeah, sorry, hello, didn't see. Yeah, I'll show you what this is, clear image zoom, in a minute, and it gave me a double focal length. It's a digital doubler, essentially. But it's this is the FS7, 150 frames, using the center crop mode, which gives you an extra length on your sensor. So
Focusing on that?
I've got a small HD daylight monitor, and I'm going off of that. I can't judge it on a little LCD screen, no chance. But it's, I'm using a Canon lens on here, and you do find the Canon lenses, they're a nightmare with focus. It's like that's in focus, and that's out of focus, that's in focus, that's out of focus. So you try and rack focus, it's like, oh, tiniest movement, and you go, oh, that's gone, hold, and then you get it. That's why autofocus is a joy. Once you start using autofocus on shots like this is where autofocus comes in great. You go, touch, tracks him. He just runs towards you, not walks, runs towards you. And that's a joy. And this is the Helix Junior on the A7S II. This was very, very chaotic. I decided to use it for actuality, where handheld would have made much more sense, but I wanted to keep this cinematic movement and feel that we had for it. Although, to be honest with you, most of the other stuff was shot handheld on the FS7 for actuality. Because I didn't shoot the whole program. There's a lot of documentaries are shot by producer-directors these days. So I was hired for all the cinematic type stuff, and then the day-to-day actuality they shot themselves. I think they were basically very excited to see a Lettuce Helix Jr. in action. They're fans. And this is a little chunk from the program, and it's got one of my favourite shots in it.
Mo was born in Somalia, but moved to Djibouti in the Horn of Africa when he was 4 years old. Whilst he trains in Ethiopia, he takes the chance to return to neighbouring Djibouti to see his twin brother Hassan and to revisit the family home.
A lot of static shots I talked about before, composition without movement. It's not always necessary.
Trying to get my attention, but he punches me. I've been getting that all my life, but now I'm gonna get it again. We used to like come here and sell samosas and stuff like that.
There's a shot coming up which is my favourite, and it's making sure my camera's the right height, and I made an effort to get there, and I was watching what was going on, rolling, and here's the key point, playing football, boat comes along, and bird was a nice little bonus. But it's just one of those shots that, whilst half of it was luck, half of it was design. I saw the shot, I got to the point where I could go low enough to get that depth and that layering of the shot.
I am nervous, but yeah, it's quite exciting too.
And this is one of the things I like about having a smaller focal length, is when you had a longer focal length, a longer zoom, you tend to be quite lazy. You stay in one position and you just fire off loads of shots from one position. When you've got a smaller focal length, you make more of an effort. You physically move the tripod, you put down and go to different points, which is great because it changes everything. Whilst you can get loads of stuff from one point, when you start moving and adjusting the height of the tripod and the depth of field to get where you want it to be, then this shot here, if I was on the road, I could have got the same focal length, but then these guys would have been well low here, and there would have been a massive gap of water. By going to the beach, going really low on the tripod, I was able to get this laying and have enough space for the boats, which I could see going backwards and forwards. And with these guys playing there, so it's just perfect positioning. Takes more time, but it's worth the effort. I love the FS5. You've got the FS5, Steve. It's a great camera. It's missing a few things the FS7 has, but the key thing about this camera is it's small. This is the best feature ever invented in a camera, variable ND built in. If you've never used a camera with variable ND built in, you'll wonder why, as soon as you use it, how you ever survived without a variable ND built in. There's only two cameras which have it, this and the FS7 Mark II. It's wonderful. So I'm sure many of you use variable NDs on the front of the lens. They're all right, they're pretty good, they're nice to have. But I'm sure many of you used ND wheels. And the biggest problem you have with ND wheels is they're fixed, and you'll find, I can't quite get the f-stop that I want. It's like in between these two NDs, and sometimes you might put a bit too much shutter in to compensate. With these, variable ND, you can get the exact f-stop you want. Keep your shutter speed at a 50th of a second, which gives you the most optimum cinematic motion. It's always double your frame rate. And you're able to just get your exposure pretty much spot on. And also the ND is really high. Yep.
If the FS5 had 10 bits, would you park the FS7 and use the FS5 because it's smaller?
Probably. Yeah, probably, because it is smaller. and this has variable ND, but it doesn't have the 10-bit. It doesn't do the 4K. It does 4K up to 30p in 8-bit. But it does slow motion in buffered mode. Buffered is actually not bad. You get used to it. Continuous slow motion is cool, but you tend to overshoot, especially if you're waiting for something to happen. So I was filming in India, waiting to get a shot of a monkey coming out of a tree on the F55. And of course, as soon as the monkey sees I'm filming him, he stops, because they're bastards, bastard monkeys. And he just stared at me. And I'm on F55 at 180 frames a second, and I go through one 128 gigabyte card, switches to the second one. So I put another card into one while it's still going. I'm like, holy shit. I was at like 400 gig, and he still hadn't jumped out of the bloody tree. And the moment I stop and wait for him is the moment he jumps. Eventually he jumped. It was a terrible shot. It was a complete waste. And you can't clip up within the camera. You can't cut a shot and then save it. You've got all of it. But with an FS5 and the buffered, there's a mode called end trigger. There's start trigger and end trigger. Start trigger means you hit record, and it records for 8.5, 9 seconds of slow motion, and then saves it at about 2-3 times speed. With end trigger, you wait for something to happen, like the monkey jumping out the tree, and as soon as you've done it, you hit record, and it saves the previous 8.5 seconds, which is great. That's all you need. Much easier. You just got to remember that 8 seconds in your head. Don't wait too long after he's jumped, because you'll miss the beginning bit. You go, damn it, missed the beginning bit of him jumping. There's also end trigger half, which saves only 4 seconds, but you don't really need that. So it's really nice. It's nice to have the option of both, and that's what I'd like in the FS7, is the option of both, which we don't have. There is firmware coming out for the FS5, which is going to give you continuous slow motion, I think 120 frames, I'm not quite sure the exact figure, as well as keeping the buffer. So that's really nice. This is so cool though. So with the RAW upgrade, and another nice feature about the FS5 that the FS7 doesn't have, it has built-in RAW out from the SDI port at the back without having to use an extension back. And the RAW, whilst I don't shoot RAW, I shoot RAW for stills, I don't shoot RAW for video because the data is just ridiculous. I had it on the F55 and I could get an hour 4K for half a terabyte, which is actually not that bad compared to Cinema DNG, which is probably, I think it's about 24 minutes for an hour. So 24 minutes for half a terabyte in Cinema DNG. So RAW's a nightmare to deal with in post, but the RAW upgrade, what it does is you take the RAW signal, put it into an Atomos Inferno or the Convergent Design 7Q or 7Q Plus. It takes that RAW signal, convert it into ProRes. ProRes 4K 50, 60, and it's 10-bit. Because it's a 12-bit RAW signal, turns it into 10-bit, which is fantastic. The image quality is superb. The downside is this stupid big monitor on this tiny little camera. So waiting for them to finally realize, I just brought out an NAB show in Vegas, a much more practical monitor, a 19-inch one. I want to put it on my A7S just for a laugh. Hey, look at this, my new rig. Falls over. Whoops, falls over. So this is too big, and the biggest problem as well is they use a lot of off-the-shelf components, and that means their battery consumption is terrible. The power they draw from the batteries is huge. So an MPF 970, big Sony batteries you had for the Z1, a couple of those will last like 90 minutes. So I do actually run it out of a D-tap into a third-party SWIT batteries, and it powers it much longer. So I can get the camera and the monitor powered for about 2 hours with one SWIT battery, which is better. But it's terrific. The image is just beautiful. I shot this for Fuji for their Cine lens in Gran Canaria. They hired me to shoot the promo video, and they gave it to me just before Christmas, which is terrible timing for England. So you try getting nice shots. It's very difficult. The weather was just foggy. I couldn't film in the cities because it was Christmas decorations everywhere, and the lens was coming out in end of January, so it wouldn't work. So I shot for 2 days. It looked awful, and I said to them, I'm going to go on holiday to Gran Canaria because I need to get away, and I'm going to bring the FS5 with me. Because I shot the original stuff in the FS7. I took the FS5 on holiday with me. I shot for 2 days out of 7 on holiday with the lens and got loads of nice stuff. And it's such a good lens. There was a problem with the first batch of them, where the iris broke, and mine had the same issue. so I had to shoot with the iris completely removed. So basically giving me an f-stop of 2.7. But it looked great. It looked great for that. They've all been fixed in the production line.
So was this in 4K or?
So this is 4K 60p and HD. There's a few HD shots at 250 frames per second.
Was that all internal? Sort of the
No, on the recorder,
yeah.
the Atomos Inferno. And it's great. The image is nicer than the FS7 when you use the FS5 with the RAW out. And this is 250 frames per second in HD. A few shots in there. And it's just a terrific image out of that camera with that lens. So I'm going off with 2 lenses next at the end of the month to shoot another film for them. I'm going to Northern Ireland. Even in the May, you never know. Wind and rain. It's going to be awful probably. Then I'll probably end up going to a Greek island or something just afterwards because it's going to be nice weather. How are we doing on time? Doing okay. I'm going to click through this. So I switched to the A7S II for the low light stuff, talk about mixing it up. And although it's super 35mm lens, using the clear image zoom, I got past the vignette. Yes?
Does he, you said 250 frames.
Yes.
Is that in NTSC?
In NTSC, in PAL mode, it does up to 200. So you can get past that as long as you're not doing any sync sound. You can shoot in as a base time base of 30p. You can shoot 250 and then conform it to 25p in post. Otherwise, if you shoot it to 24p, which is the standard for NTSC, then you're going to have a slight issue when you play it back because it plays back. Actually, on the Atomos, it doesn't play it back as slow motion. It records it as 250 frames. 250p, so you have to tell it in the edit to play it back at a frame rate, and you can tell it to play at 25p.
You don't have audio syncing, whatever, and it's just literally showing stuff like that.
Yeah. Just shoot in NTSC. Oh, actually, if you're using the Atomos Inferno, just shoot at NTSC and then conform it to 25p. That's what I did. The edit's 25p, and I shot all in NTSC to give me extra frames per second. So, A7R2, one here. So it's my favourite. Internal 4K. It's actually a lovely image. It's interesting, when I shot the Wonderlist for CNN, the editors liked this image more than any other camera, which made no sense because this camera, it does bin pixels to get that from that 42 megapixels. Anyone know what the image size of 4K is, megapixels? 8.2. HD is 2. So it needs to get from 42 to 8. So it does throw away stuff, but it's amazing. It actually looks really good. 5x stabilized sensor, autofocus, amazing. Great for handheld shooting actually. Just keeping people really close up, keeping it in focus, which is always a bonus when you're shooting. Beautiful HD image, great stills. This is a little clip from Wonderlist that I shot on the A7R2.
Within 2 days we were using the hell. And then 30 days later, we eloped. Like most American dads,
Again, shooting handheld gives you that sort of nice, fluid, natural motion. If I had doing it on a tripod, it would have felt a little bit too fake and set up. By being handheld, it felt much more natural, even though it was completely fake and set up. I tried to make it not look fake and set up. Yeah.
So you want a kind of light lens, don't you? Don't want anything too...
Yeah, so that would have been, I'm trying to think what lens I would have used on that. I don't know, it was a while ago. But I would shoot maybe, I tend to shoot on a standard lens, like a 50mm. There's a 55 1.8, which is really nice, very small. The manual focus is a bit of a pain on it, as they all are. But
To shoot full frame, or do you think?
yeah, I shoot full frame. The whole point of that camera for me is I do switch into Super 35 when I need to for certain things, but apparently the rolling shutter issues are less with Super 35. But with the 5-axis stabilized sensor, it gets past most of them anyway. So, and you can switch easy enough, and you can use this next feature called clear image zoom, which I've talked about a few times, and it's such a cool feature. And normally when you look at the gazillion menus on the Sonys, you'll see something that says zoom, and you'll go, "Oh, not touching that," because it says optical only, and you're like, yeah, of course. Nobody ever wants digital zoom. You sit on the side of consumer cameras, 400 times digital zoom. You know just how bad that's going to look. It does have digital zoom on here. Do not touch it. It has, so you have 3 options: optical only, clear image zoom, and digital zoom. Set it to clear image zoom, and then set one of your shortcut buttons to zoom, and you're able to go up to 2 times on the clear image zoom. What it does is it recreates pixels. So as it zooms in, it recreates them. It sees what they are and recreates the one next to it, which is genius, because there's no loss in quality. Don't know how it does it, but it does it. So A7R2 in Super 35mm mode on 100-400mm. At 400mm, it's going to give you a field of view of about 640mm. And with 2 times clear image zoom, you're able to get 1280. Just show you something on it. And if you crop that 4K to HD, you get this ridiculous figure there. And this is a shot. This was in a Land Rover resting on a bag with 400mm with Super 35 to get the extra length and 2 times clear image zoom. He was far away from me. He was far away from me. And you'll see in a minute, it goes out of focus. Do anybody know why it goes out of focus? Get ready for it. There. Why did it go out of focus? If you're ever shooting, do you ever get that point where, is it in focus? And you go, yeah, it was. That's what it was. So it's, that's just one of those things. Whereas if it was, I didn't use autofocus on that at the point. I don't know how well, it probably doesn't work that well on that lens, on the Metabones, but I was able to get a crazy tight shot and really stable, considering how far away I was, and it was not on a tripod.
Why would you not do that digital zoom in post?
Because it's not digital zoom. It recreates pixels. So up to 2 times. So on the FS5 in 4K lets you do up to 1.5 times. In HD it gives you 2 times. In the FS7 it doesn't have it. It's genius. It does not lose quality. You go into if you cropped into that in post, yes, whilst you can replicate that field of view, you will lose quality because this is still 4K. Still stays as 4K, resamples pixels without loss in quality. It is magic. I completely ignored it. It's been on Sony cameras for a long time, back to the NEX 5N, and I never touched it. Just saw it and went, ugh, digital zoom.
So does the FS7 not have clear image?
No, or the FS7 too. FS5 does, up to 1.5 in 4K, 2 times in HD. So it's a terrific feature, and it changes. When you're shooting handheld, suddenly you've got a 50mm prime, and you can get 100mm field of view. We'll switch to Super 35 and then go to 2 times, even longer. So it's a great feature. Yep. So.
Do you want to film the slow-mo in the camera? Sometimes do it in the editing later on.
Don't do it in post if you can avoid it, because it will never look as good. So you need to obviously know you're going to shoot slow-mo. You could, in theory, shoot everything as 50p. But on the A7 cameras, there's no 4K 50p. It's only up to 30p, so you can't do that. If you want slow-mo, you've got to shoot in HD. In the FS7, you can shoot in 50p.
So prior to doing these slow-mo, you have to make
You make a decision when you're doing it. If you're just doing beauty shots, then I would just shoot in slow-mo, so they can make that call in post where they want to do it. The only downside is your shutter speed will be faster. So it'll be 100th of a second for 50p rather than 50th, which means when they speed it up, the motion won't be quite as fluid as you want it to be, but it's still not that bad, 100th of a second. So, and there are plugins which can add motion blur. DaVinci Resolve has a really good feature for motion blur if you want that. The only time you're really going to notice it is if you're taking 250 frames per second, and then. But you do this a lot though. You, like with Mo Farah running, what it'd have is him running basically real time, which is sped up, slow motion, and then when it gets to a key point, you hit a cut, and you change your speed to 100%, whereas before it would be 400%, and it's beautiful slow mo. But that bit of him running at normal speed looks a little bit unnatural because it's got a high shutter speed of 500th of a second, or whatever it is. So that's the only real downside to doing that sort of stuff, but you can't fix that really. So matching cameras. Now, using multiple cameras is very common. I use a lot of cameras. Use an X-Rite color checker passport. Just film a little color chart on, which you can keep in your pocket, and that's really essential. I think there's an X-Rite little stand downstairs, and they have them there. They're terrific. But a lot of these cameras have the same profiles. So the A7S III has the same profiles as the FS7 and FS5. It has S-gamma at 3. So it has S-Log3 and S-gamma at Cine and all these things which match quite well. But if you use plugins like Film Convert, they have all presets anyway, and you can get some really terrific stuff. Log, who shoots log here? Anybody not know what log is? Cool, that's fine. So log is it's a gamma curve which holds your dynamic range, whereas normally things are quite contrasty. You end up with your shadows, you don't really see that much in them. You basically have to make a choice. So if you've got something heavily backlit, you're going to have trouble seeing the object in front. So log holds everything. So this is an example. This is me heavily backlit on the A7S II in log. This is what it looks, and I often shoot Cine profiles in the A7S II because log is a bit of a stretch for 8-bit, so you've got to get your exposure right on. But here I needed to shoot log. This is not log, this is Cine profile. You see the problem I have. Now if I expose my face, that would blow out even more. I've got clipped highlights behind me, but my face is gone. You try and pull that up, you'll get noise. Here, it's all held.
So is it a bit like raw?
Yeah, essentially, I mean it's,
If you shoot it like that, you get more.
yeah. RAW will give you a better dynamic range. It's not RAW, it's still a baked-in ISO. It's not as flexible as RAW, but it's as close as you're going to get to RAW without shooting on a high-end camera with RAW. So this is, if the 10-bit internal recording, if I had that, then I shoot everything S-Log when I'm shooting on the big cameras, and I make that judgment call when shooting on the smaller cameras with the 8-bits. I shoot the FS5 4K 8-bit a lot, and it's all about getting your exposure right, learning how to read your histogram or your waveform, judging your exposure and always getting it perfect, because then you have to do a lot less grading. It's when you start bringing your exposure down or pushing your exposure in post, that's when you start having issues with 8-bit. Yes? Oh yeah. As soon as my camera has 10-bit, I'm log all the way. I mean, that's why a lot of people are excited about that other camera, because it will have 10-bit recording for all the modes. But I've shot 8-bit for years, and as long as you get your exposure right, it's fine. But this is why you want to shoot log. This is the difference. No, not everything needs to be log. If you have a well-lit place which is even, you don't need to shoot log as such. But if you can, then you should, because it gives you that flexibility in post. It's like, as you're saying with RAW, I never shoot JPEGs. I always shoot RAW because it gives you that flexibility.
This is when you use ND filters as well.
Use ND filters for everything on the A7 cameras, on any camera, even in England, outdoors. I was filming in the desert last week, and holy crap was it bright. And Vegas as well, that was insanely bright. I had to use so much ND, it was insane. But, unless you want to shoot with a crazy high shutter speed, I did a webinar for Sony, and there was a really talented guy called Phil White who shoots weddings. And we're just talking about it. He's not a technical guy. He's a creative guy. He doesn't use ND filters, so he gets his shallow depth of field by shooting up to 8,000th per second. Which is fine for stills, if you want to capture that moment. But for video, anything goes through the frame. It's staccato. If you're just filming people milling around and stuff, it looks okay. But as soon as people start moving, it's like, it just looks awful. Always using ND. So I always have ND on the front. I wouldn't need it inside here, if I'm filming the show. Although it's quite bright, you can get away with that ND. Just shoot it. Don't shoot if you're shooting log, you'd have issues because it is a higher f-stop, so a high ISO. This base ISO on the A7R in log is 800. The A7S is 3200, which is the same as the FS5, I believe, is 3200. or was it 2000? 2000? No, it's 3200. The FS5 is 3200. The FS7 is 2000. It's all about where the sensor performs the best according to the Sony engineers. But you look at it and you go, okay, so if I'm shooting at 1600 ISO as my minimum and I cannot go below it, you go, well, that's freaking me out in daylight. But essentially though, the gamma curve, the way that it works, is it's essentially 2 stops brighter. So you basically need to expose 2 stops brighter than you would normally. So when you actually work it out, if you're switching between log and a cine profile, which has a base ISO of 320, you realize that it's the same exposure as if you were shooting at about 400. So it's 2 stops, 400 to 800, 800 to 1600. It's actually not that bad. Don't freak out too much about this high number because you tend to expose a lot higher. This is where you need to learn how to read your histogram. Don't go with the metering on the camera because it will just show +2 and it'll flash, which will freak you out. Look at your histogram. Histogram on the screen, if you don't know what histogram is, I haven't got a picture of it. It's a little thing on the bottom right, and basically the way you expose it is you look at it like a nice mountain range, well composed. So it's a nice peaky range. And just a little bit shunted to the right, just make sure you don't have these solid lines on the right or the left, which is clipped shadows and clipped highlights. So exposure is key, yes.
Would you shoot SL3 in low light? Or just I know it's
Which camera?
A7S.
No, I would shoot Cine 4. As soon as I go over 6400, I switch to Cine 4 from Cine 2. So I tend to shoot, Cine 4 for daylight, Cine 2 for low light. It tends to be, well, I'll just show some low light here. So this was the first, so when the A7S came out, they had a launch video which showed fishing in Scotland, I think it was, and it was shot in really low light, but you couldn't tell because it looked like daylight. I was like, that's cool, but I don't get a sense of the power of the camera. So I went down to Brighton and I filmed at night time to see what I could get, and there you go. So the dark was what the eye could see, and then the bright is what the camera could see. So this is, I know, 20,000, and then this is 800 equivalent. Cine 2, which has a slightly less noise in it. This is 10 p.m. at night. And it's crazy to have that ability. It's really more for, rather than trying to make Brighton Beach look like daylight, and also if you do go to Brighton Beach at night time, sorry, when it's dark as opposed to moon, people do get up to dodgy stuff. And I was with my friend James, and he was filming as well, and he went, "Oh my God, what's going on there?" So I'm like, James, take the camera away. But in real terms, when would you use this crazy high ISO? It's more to do with shooting in lower light without being wide open. So shooting at 25,600 and not having to be at 1.4, which you're normally shooting in low light, being able to shoot at f4 and having a depth of field to play with, that is so important. Or this, filming the Northern Lights in Norway. So I'm at ISO 10,000 here. I've dropped the shutter speed to 25th of a second because there's no movement in the frame, as opposed to, there's a little bit of aurora going. So it gains me an extra stop of light as well. But I went pretty high. There's a clip coming up where I'm shooting at, I think, 80,000 in a second. I think this is pretty high. This is probably at 51,200. So there's times when you want that crazy high. So I was filming in the Grand Canyon. We were doing a boat trip down the Grand Canyon, and at night time the moon never came out because it was the wrong time of the month, and so we were lit by the stars. And there was all these elderly Americans who were on this trip because it cost a fortune, they save up and they want to do it, and they all had these bloody headlamps on which completely obliterated everything, and you could barely see this incredible Milky Way galaxy above you. So I was trying to film them and trying to capture the stars and them, and they had these lights. We asked them to turn the lights off and just said, look above you. And they went, oh my God, we cannot see our food, and turn them back on again. But I did get some really cool stuff, and I was shooting as high as I did get to 250,000 at one point because it was so dark. Noisy as hell, but I captured the shots. So you still need to do noise reduction at above 50,000. I would say use Neat Video and you can get some great results. There's a bit coming up shortly which is really, really good. And so we were both shooting on A7S2s, and the A7S and the A7S2 given the first chance of really filming the aurora in real time. Because prior to that, it was all time-lapse, which didn't show the natural movements. But we were able to get, this is such a cool shot, we'll never be able to capture people and the aurora. And this is quite a dark aurora actually, so they can be a lot brighter than that. And we go to this spot here, let's have a look. Not that one. Touch bar rubbish.
That's amazing. Is that pretty fast then?
Yeah, it was okay. I think faster, but that's what he's really kills. He gets his fast white.
I think that's what we, before the sensitive camera came along, the A7S cameras, we just used to see time lapse. We never used to see, you guys used to because you're there for real, but people like myself watching it online, it was always, you didn't know sort of speed. And I remember the first time I saw one of the videos that showed the speed, and this is real time, and it was like, wow.
This is all A7S2 inside as well, of course.
No, time lapses. Most time lapses move the aurora way too fast.
Being able to shoot in available light. Lighting doesn't replace lighting, but for documentary filmmaking where you're going with available light, like this, I'm not going to put a little LED panel to light him. It needs to be natural. I want to see the light hitting his face from the street lamps. I want to see the light behind. And I can get it perfectly exposed.
Than I expected. Okay, yeah, but you see, look at through the camera, you're like, okay, it really pings on the A7S.
And when we go where we're going now, it's really dark. You can predict it now, how it's going to be in the next hour, in the next 2 hours. So 5 or 6 years ago, there was a lot more waiting. You just waited and waited and waited for the aurora to show up. And eventually it did, but many times it did not. And people that just see your photos or your films, they never think about all the hours spent that you never get to see the aurora. So waiting and missed opportunities.
What's that? You sure? It's not like something in there.
So I could see that just a few meters ahead of me was not ice with my eyes, but I could with the camera, but it was like, whoa, that would be the end of me. So 51,200. Yeah, all of this is melted. It's not frozen. It's right by me.
When filming incredibly low light situations like this, you're obviously going to need the fastest lens you can get. And I want to shoot wide, and the fastest lens I own that's wide is the Sigma 20mm Art at 1.4, which helps a lot.
I think they got a wider one now. I think there's a 14 1.4 or something like that coming out, which would be like, yay, let's go out there again. I've only got 10 minutes, so I'll skip through. This is the series I talked about on and off. This was really cinematic that I tried to make. I threw everything at it. And these are the cameras that we used. First the FS5, then the FS7, first the A7S, then the A7S2, A7R2, and the RX100s, and RX10 Mark II. Great for like underwater stuff, those two last cameras, and just for like extra shots and just grabbing some super slow motion quickly, because they both do 250 frames per second, only for 2 seconds, but you'd be surprised how much you can get for 2 seconds. And the new ones, the 5, the 3 doesn't do double yet, but the RX100 Mark V does 4 seconds, which is still not that much, but it'd be amazing how much you can get. We had a lot of kit, but this is key. A lot of gear doesn't make things more cinematic. They just get in the way. It's too much distraction and too much setting up rather than just getting your story told. This is how much gear I had, which is ridiculous, traveling around the world with that. The whole point of this camera is to keep them minimal, but because I was traveling to these really remote places, I needed like 2 drones in case one crashed, 2 movies or 2 stabilizers in case I had any issues, because it's a key part of the look of the show. You know, we had 2 FS7s, we had a couple of A7s, S's, and other cameras and tripods and audio gear.
What drones were you using?
What drones? Depending on when we first series was Phantom 2 with GoPro, then Inspire 1, that came at the end of the first series, and then Phantom 3, Inspire 1, and then Phantom 4, mostly. Now, if I was shooting the series now, I would use the Phantom 4 Pro because it's a terrific image. It's a lot of crap though. Complete nightmare, because you're moving hotels pretty much every night, which is a nightmare. So this is that shot with a shot on the A7R2. This is the cool thing about the A7R2, it shoots great stills. So I was able to get that. The only downside is that perfect moment where the bird claw got swallowed was when I was shooting stills, not on video. Can't do both yet. That's hopefully the next feature. Or if it shoots 8K, then you can just take a frame grab. So maybe that will happen, I don't know. We've touched on these 3-axis gimbals before. So here's the Helix Junior. And this is the Movi with the ring we talked about. And the great thing about the ring is you can sit in a dinghy, or I sat in a kayak with it for like 6 hours in the ocean on CNN's insurance, because I wouldn't take it in there otherwise. And whereas normal gimbals, you're like tired and you're like, oh, I need to put it down, and you know where to put it down, and you're dying. Whereas we got the ring, you can just rest it on your lap and it still works. Using it in helicopters still works. So I'm going to show you a one-take clip through a house in Amsterdam, rehearsed, so we got it right, using some auto features. Autofocus, because I can't keep focus. It's still the A7S II, so it's not great at autofocus, but it's a wide lens, it's a 16mm, and it's a f8, so my depth of field is forgiving. And I use auto ISO. Auto ISO on these cameras. Now on the FS5, you've got auto ND, variable ND, and it's amazing. But everything else, the smoothest way of changing your exposure is actually the ISO. You try changing your f-stop and it's 1/3 of a stop increment unless you have a smooth iris. But if you're using a gimbal, you can't touch it anyway. So basically you have ND on the camera because I'm filming outside. So you start outside and we end outside. I get my exposure right with the ND and go, cool. I go to the darkest point inside the house and see what ISO it goes to, what I need to match the f-stop and ND that I've got on there. And then I set the maximum ISO to that point. And if it's, I think the maximum ISO was 6,400. It didn't go to that, but 6,400, it's cleaner than anything. So it doesn't matter. And so you're able to do this. Do we need this shot? Do we need to do a one-take walking through a house? Probably not. But it's a nice, high production value thing to have in the actual show. And I think it's nice. It doesn't necessarily make it cinematic, although we have lots of one-takes in films and stuff which are really cool, and the geeks in us go, whoa, they've not cut yet. That's amazing. But I don't think the viewer can notice, to be honest with you. But we can. And we get excited by that. Yeah, we did a one-take. So go in, it gets darker, and see how it brightens up? Beautifully smooth. Yeah, I've seen them all, and they're not quite as long as some of them. One day I'll do a longer one.
Did you say this was on the FS5?
A7S II. So I set my metering to the whole frame, evaluative, and so I don't want it to bring him up. I want to keep that. I want to see a silhouette, but I still want to see his face. It just kind of gets it just right on there. And watch what happens to the sky as I go through. At the moment it's blown out. And watch that sky come back as the auto ISO lowers. There he goes.
Did this work first time?
Yeah, it did actually, but the rehearsal, we did roll on it, but his words weren't right. So when technically it worked best, his words were wrong. When his words were best, technically it wasn't perfect. That's what it's always going to be like. And this was kind of a middle ground. I think it was like the 8th time, and like, that'll do. Because the more you do it, the more screw-ups on the words he's going to have, because he's thinking.
Did he have a mic on?
Yeah, he had a mic on, a wireless mic. Normally you'd record into an external recorder. You could put the mic on the camera, but then I can't really monitor it because I'm so focused on doing this, and I don't want to have a cable getting in the way. We actually did audio on the 8. It was plugged into an FS7, which the producer had. We didn't have the recorder on us, so he just plugged it in. He was walking around behind me with an FS7, which is ridiculous. The most overpriced audio recorder out there. But it worked perfectly well. So.
Sorry, that was handheld?
No, that was using that right-hand one, that gimbal, Movi M5, the one on the right. But you can get little gimbals now. I have to say, the problem with the one-arm gimbals is they're much more tiring because it's on one hand, and you'd be surprised at how you think, oh, it's only one hand, one-armed, and it's only a little camera on it. It still gets really heavy, and you go, I really wish I had that weight across both hands because it's very lopsided. And when you're holding them, that's why it's so good at having this thing, because you can hold it low down and keep your body there, because otherwise you tend to hold them quite high away from your body, and that's where your fatigue and your back goes. Just here, which is, you don't have any muscles there. Who has a muscle at the middle back there? It just aches. So you relax your body and just do it like that.
Can I just ask?
Yes.
The smaller HD monitor.
Yes.
What would you recommend? Because sometimes there's quite a price difference with,
Yeah.
HD to know what the difference is. I find what's really difficult is that if you ring up wherever I go to Norwich where my sister lives, I go there and I can see them. They're like, well, we don't actually have displays.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you know what to buy if you can't even?
So yeah, I picked up 3 new ones at the show last week. They're 2 new expensive ones, the 503 and 703, which are called Ultra Brights, which have a nit of 2,300 and 2,500. It basically means in that bright, crazy Vegas sunshine, I could see everything. It's 2,500 though. They've just brought out as well the Focus, which you can see on, I don't know who has it, I think on Panasonic, Holden have it. It's the Focus, it's $500, so it should be around £450. And it's 800 nits, which is still really bright. And it does have, it's called Focus because it has touch thing, so at some point it will integrate with the camera, and if you have touchscreen focus, it'll work. It's a great monitor, and it's 450 quid, and it's daylight. It's called the Focus from Small HD. Just announced at the show last week. Really good. That's the one I would recommend unless you want to spend 400, it will be about £450. I don't think you can buy it just yet, but it's very soon. I mean, if you've got £2,500, I'd recommend the 503, which looks like a magazine. It's so crystal clear, like, whoa. I took a photo and it was as bright on the screen as it was in real life. And the power consumption, I talk about the Atomos being crazy. The power consumption on these monitors is so good. On the Focus, one Sony battery will last all day. On the 503 and 703, 2 of those will last all day. Which is great because those batteries take 8 to 9 hours to charge up, which is awful. But yeah, yes.
I just wanted to jump back to the beginning of your presentation. You talked about the different meta bands.
Yep.
What's the difference between the Ultra and the normal without the glasses?
It's better, sharper, edge to edge, and more money. It is better though, so the Ultra is better. And the T on the normal one has better autofocus. So better electronics inside. Whilst they upgrade the firmware, electronics are better. It's just basically is a flange and electronics adapter. It's not a focal reducer, so it's really just for keeping the same focal length. I think I have to wrap up because it's 2 o'clock, but I'll take a couple more questions. Yep. Yes. What's going on? Is there a church service or something?
With recording to 10 bits.
Yes.
It's possible internally with the 8s.
Yes.
But I know you don't like external recorders.
Yes.
Don't really do you find that that's worth it using it?
Not on an A7S because it's still 8-bit. Still 8-bit. Whilst it has a higher bit rate, so it's less compressed, it will still band if you don't get your exposure right. It is better, but is it worth the trade-off of the ergonomics of having this really annoying, huge monitor on there.
So it's not significant?
No, not at all, no. It is on the FS5 when you're using the raw output because it's no longer 8-bit, it's a 10-bit recording. So if your camera does 10-bit out and does 8-bit recording, I would recommend it. But as far as I know, all the Sony cameras are pretty much, if they do 8-bit, they're only 8-bit. If they do 10 bits, there's no point in using an external recorder. So. Yes, hi.
I thought singing was to round off your talk.
The what sort of singing? Okay, we'll join in. The Sony anthem, whatever that is. I don't know if there is one.
The Batis lenses.
Yes.
You know, it's focusing by wire.
Yes.
Would it be crazy to stick lens gear on that and use it? I know it's a great auto, but could you use it for manual as well?
Yeah, I use it for manual. I wouldn't put a follow focus on it, but you could put like a lens gear on it to give you a better grip or something like that. And I've got some follow focus gears which have a little spindle on it, so you can use that.
Have you ever tried it?
Yeah, not on a follow focus, no. I tend to avoid follow focuses as much as I can because I come from the school of E&G with my hand on the lens. I'm so used to that, and I've never really got to grips with the follow focus. If I have a focus puller, which is almost never, then I use them. Budget is assistant / sound recorders first. Focus puller is like way down the list. Yes.
So what's your opinions of like auto ND on FS5?
Great. If you are changing your exposure and you know quite drastically, and you need to do that, otherwise manual all the way. What you don't want is suddenly your exposure to move as you're panning across a window with somebody going past and like, whoa, what's going on there? You just want to keep it even. It's auto ND if you need that change, like you're going inside the house and outside. Sure, it's really good, really smooth. Great, okay, thanks very much. If you need to ask me any questions, there's my social media there, and I hope you enjoy the show and don't spend too much. Actually, spend lots of money. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.